So I'm really excited to announce this next speaker. This is someone I haven't had an opportunity to meet prior to this Talent Connect, and one I feel really humbled, actually, to introduce. His name is Father Gregory Boyle. And Father Greg, I was told I was going to have this opportunity to introduce him, so I looked him up on YouTube, I looked him up on Google, just to make sure we're on the Google page. And he was inspirational, and he's extremely funny. Like, he had like 5 great jokes. I was going to use this Talent Connect, but since he's speaking, I'm going to use it for next year. So, Father Greg, I'm excited to introduce you. He's the founder of Homeboy Industries, the largest gang intervention, rehabilitation, and re-entry center in the United States. Amazing. His message is about creating opportunity for these individuals. He's known throughout the world, and we know, and he knows, that a job can change a life. And in one of the best comments or quotes that they had on YouTube was that a job can stop a bullet. He is impacting lives every day. So with no further ado, Father Greg, please join me. You do.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. Oh my God. I had no idea I was bald. Thank you, LinkedIn, for pointing that out. I'm an expert on nothing, but for 30 years I've worked with gang members, so apparently the organizers of this event thought that made me eminently suited to address you this morning. I'm so honored, privileged to have worked with gang members. They've taught me everything of value, and recently a guy named Lewis, who kind of runs the place when I'm not there, one of the many gang members who does run the place, he's become something of a public speaker himself, and so he was kind of giving me tips on speaking publicly, and he said, you have to pepper your talk with self-defecating humor. I said, yeah, no shit. So brace yourselves. Thank you for your attention. You know, I know I'm the only thing standing between you and lunch, so thank you for this position in the program. You know, folks on the margins are just hoping for a little bit of notice. I had a very earnest 16-year-old gang member stand in front of my desk, and he said, look, I need your divided attention. I said, well, you are in luck, because that's exactly what you'll be getting. There's a vision that brings you to this conference, and it's a vision of, in the end, wanting the world to look differently than it currently looks. The prophet Habakkuk writes, the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, wait for it. But none of us want to wait for too long, you know, con los brazos cruzados, you know, tapping our feet and staring at our watches. All of us in this room want to make something happen. Mother Teresa, I think, diagnosed the world's ills correctly when she suggested that the problem in the world is that we've just forgotten that we belong to each other. So how do we stand against forgetting that? How do we imagine a circle of compassion and then imagine nobody standing outside that circle? How do we together dismantle the barriers that exclude? I think part of what we're all called to do in our own particularity is to walk out to the very margins, the very edges of the margins, and stand there. And if you stand there, look under your feet, you'll see that the margins are getting erased because of that decision to stand there. And so you stand with the poor and the powerless and the voiceless. You stand with those whose burdens are more than they can bear, with those whose dignity has been denied. Every once in a while, you get very privileged to be able to stand with the easily despised and the readily left out, with the demonized, so that the demonizing will stop, and with the disposable, so that the day will come when we stop throwing people away. I suspect that if kinship, in fact, was our goal, we would no longer be promoting justice. We'd be celebrating it. For no kinship, no justice. No kinship, no peace. And so the homies have taught me all this, everything of value, but especially what kinship looks like. But in the last couple of years, they've taught me how to text, and so I'm so grateful to them because I find it sure beats the heck out of actually talking to people. And I'm pretty good at it, LOL and OMG and BTW. And the homies have taught me a new one, OHN, which apparently stands for, oh, hell no. And I've been using that one quite a bit lately. So there I am in a car with two older vatos, Manuel and Poncho, and tattooed, been to prison. They're going to help me give a talk at a high school. Manuel's in the front seat, and he gets an incoming text, and he reads it to himself, and he chuckles. And I say, what is it? He goes, oh, it's dumb. It's from Snoopy back at the office. Well, I just seen Snoopy. Snoopy gave me a big abrazo as the day began, and Snoopy and Manuel worked together in the clock-in room. They clock in hundreds and hundreds of our workers. We've got about 400 of them. And it's a tough job. And I said, well, what does Snoopy say? He goes, oh, it's dumb. Hang on. Hey, dog, it's me, Snoops. Yeah, they got my ass locked up at county jail. They're charging me with being the ugliest vato in America. You have to come down right now, show them they got the wrong guy. Well, the three of us, we died laughing, and then I realized that Manuel and Snoopy are enemies. They're from rival gangs. They used to shoot bullets at each other. Now they shoot text messages. And there's a word for that, and the word is kinship. How do we obliterate once and for all the illusion that we are separate? There is no distance or daylight that ought to separate us. There is no us and them. There's just us. Even in service, as good as that is, that's the hallway that gets you to the ballroom. You want to get to the ballroom, the place of connection and exquisite mutuality. Even at Homeboy, I'm not the great healer, and that gang member over there is in need of my exquisite healing. The truth is, we're all in need of healing. We're all a cry for help. There is no service provider and service recipient. You want to bridge that distance. One of the great privileges of my life was knowing Cesar Chavez as a friend, an extraordinary man, of course. But I remember once a reporter had commented to him and said, wow, these farm workers, they sure love you. And Cesar just shrugged and smiled and said, the feeling's mutual, which of course is the hope. How do you bridge that distance? There was a homie everybody called Dreamer. I knew him since he was a little kid growing up in the projects. He got into a gang, and a very smart kid, though I don't think he ever much went to school. He had a real dangerous and devious sense of humor. And he was kind of a yo-yo in his early 20s, always getting locked up, and I'd find him a job, but then he'd gravitate back to vague criminality, usually something involving drugs, the sale of or the use of, and then he'd wander back to me. And so this one time he had finished a 4-month stretch at county jail, and there he is sitting in front of me. And he says what gang members often say, this time it'll be different. I go, all right. So with him sitting there, I call a friend of mine who runs a vending machine company in Alhambra, California. He had hired homies in the past. I hoped he might do it again, and so he does. And Dreamer begins work the next day at the vending machine company. Well, 2 weeks later, there he is again, sitting in front of my desk, and I go, Híjole Madre Santa, here we go again. But this time he pulls out of his pocket his first paycheck, and he says, damn, G, This paycheck makes me feel proper. I mean, my mom, she's proud of me, and my kids, they're not ashamed of me. And you know who I have to thank for this job. And I said, well, gosh, who? And he looked at me strangely and he said, well, God, of course. I said, oh, that's right. Yeah, that would be God. Yeah. He said, you thought I was going to say you. I said, no, gosh. No, God's number one. Yeah. He said, you are so lucky we're not living in them Genesis days. Them Genesis days. He goes, yeah, because God would have had struck down your ass already by now. Well, all I remember was the two of us, we dissolved in laughter. We fell out of our chairs. And I defy you to identify exactly who's the service provider, who's the service recipient. It's mutual. So Homeboy Industries was born during the time I was pastor of the poorest parish in the city of Los Angeles, Dolores Mission, nestled in the middle of two public housing projects, Aliso Village and Pico Gardens. At the time, they were the largest grouping of public housing west of the Mississippi. We had 8 gangs at war with each other, which was unheard of in those days, making it the place of the highest concentration of gang activity anywhere was my parish. I buried my first young person killed because of this sadness in 1988, and 3 months ago I buried my 194th. So we did a lot of things. First thing was we started a school because there were so many middle school, junior high age kids who had been given the boot from their home school. Nobody wanted them. So I walked out to the projects because they were violent and selling drugs, and I talked to each one. I said, if I found a school that would take you, would you go? And to my surprise, they all said, yeah. And then I couldn't find a school that would take them. So it forced my hand. So I went to the convent, which was on the 3rd floor of our elementary parochial school, first 2 floors school, 3rd floor, all the nuns. So I gathered all the nuns in the living room and I said, hey, would you guys mind, moving out and we could turn the convent into a school? And they said, sure. So we did, and that brought gang members to the church property because it was across the street from the church. And that upset the apple cart because aren't churches supposed to be hermetically sealed? Good people in and bad people out. And so that was a good challenge. And then the gang members said if only we had jobs. And so myself and the women in the parish, we went searching for marching around the factories that surrounded the projects trying to find felony-friendly employers. That wasn't so forthcoming. So we couldn't wait. We did a lot of things, started graffiti removal crews and all sorts of things. Finally, I went to a movie producer, asked him to buy this old bakery across the street from the church. And I said, we'll put hair nets on enemy rival gang members and we'll call it Homeboy Bakery. And he said, sure. So we were off and running. 2 months later, we started Homeboy Tortillas in the Grand Central Market. Once we had plural, we came up with the highfalutin Homeboy Industries, as if there was any industry involved in this venture. Not everything worked. I'll be the first to admit it. Homeboy Plumbing really was not hugely successful. Who knew? People didn't want gang members in their homes. I did not see that coming. And nobody intends to do anything like this, but we sort of backed our way into becoming now the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the United States. So 15,000 folks a year. 15,000 folks walk through our doors. There are 1,100 gangs in LA County and 120,000 gang members, so it's a pretty daunting, complex social dilemma. We offer lots of curricular things, especially for our 18-month workers. We've got several hundred of those, and We have every kind of imaginable thing from anger management and parenting and grief and loss. We still have a school with 120 students, all gang members and on probation. We have free tattoo removal. No place on the planet Earth removes more gang tattoos than we do. We have a designated clinic, 3 machines, 47 volunteer doctors, 40,000 treatments a year. So if any of you are starting to regret that LinkedIn tattoo you have, see me afterwards. And it was all started because of a guy named Frank who wandered into my office 2 days after being released from Corcoran State Prison. I had never met him. And he's sitting in front of me, and tattooed on his forehead was like a billboard filling the whole space, was the world. And he looked at me and he said, "You know, I am having a hard time finding a job." I said, "Well, you know, Frank, maybe we could put our heads together on this one." I'm thinking, where do I send him? You know, to McDonald's? Do you want fries with that? No. So I hired him, and he bagged bread for a couple of years, and I went looking for a doctor who had a laser machine. I found one who gave me 1 hour a month to chip away at Frank's forehead and a few others. And pretty soon I had a waiting list of 3,000 gang members, so we couldn't really stay with that arrangement. In parentheses, Frank is now a security guard at a Hollywood movie studio, and there is no trace left of the dumbest thing he's ever done, proving once and for all that all of us are a whole lot more than the worst things we've done. And so we have all our, everybody's in therapy. We have lots of therapists. We have case managers, all our training programs, solar panel installation training programs, all our social enterprises, lots of, we have the bakery still, Homeboy silkscreen, Homeboy homegirl merchandise where we sell our logo stuff, Homeboy Diner, the only place you can buy food at City Hall in Los Angeles. If you fly American Airlines Terminal 4 in Los Angeles, we have a restaurant at the airport. Farmers markets, we have Homeboy Environmental Services, where 30 gang members clean out storm drains. And Homegirl Cafe, where women with records, young ladies from rival gangs, waitresses with attitude, will gladly take your order. It's a who's who. A lot of people come by there. We had Jim Carrey, the actor, the other day. It was pandemonium. All the Dodgers came once. Once we had Diane Keaton show up for lunch, she of Academy Award for Annie Hall and Godfather movies, big movie star. Her waitress is Glinda, and Glinda's a big girl, been there, done that, tattooed, gang member, been to prison, felon. She doesn't know who Diane Keaton is. And so she's taking her order, and Diane Keaton says, "What do you recommend?" And Glinda rattles off the 3 platillos that she particularly likes, and Diane Keaton says, "I'll have that second one. That one sounds good." And it's at that moment something dawns on Glinda. She looks at Diane Keaton. She says, "Wait a minute. I feel like I know you from somewhere, like maybe we've met." And Diane Keaton decides to deflect it humbly. "Oh, gosh, I suppose I have one of those faces, you know, that people think they've seen before." And then Glinda goes, "No, now I know. We were locked up together." Yeah, that just took my breath away when I heard it. And I don't believe we've had any further Diane Keaton sightings now that I think of it. But suddenly, kinship so quickly, Oscar-winning actress, attitudinal waitress, exactly what God had in mind, and if you'll permit me, I think Jesus explains it pretty well when he looks out at the gathered and he says, "That you may be one." It's about us. It's about us staying connected to each other. It's about us standing against forgetting that we belong to each other, for there's an idea that's taken root in the world, It's at the root of all that's wrong with it. And the idea would be this, that there just might be lives out there that matter less than other lives. How do we stand against that idea? All of us are called to be what Alice Miller, the late great child psychologist, called enlightened witnesses. People who, through your kindness and tenderness and focused, attentive love, return people to themselves. You don't hold the bar up and ask people to measure up. You just show up and hold the mirror up and tell people the truth, knowing that your truth is my truth, and my truth is a gang member's truth, and it all happens to be the same truth. And here's the truth. You are exactly what God had in mind when God made you. And then you watch folks, particularly on the margins, as they become that truth, as they inhabit that truth, and no bullet can pierce it, no four prison walls can keep it out, and death can't touch it because it's huge. But occasionally you have to reach in and dismantle the barriers and messages of shame and disgrace that get in the way, that keep people from seeing their truth. If you take a leisurely stroll, for example, through the Acts of the Apostles, it won't just show you a quaint snapshot of life in the earliest Christian community. It will, in fact, show you, I think, the measure of health in any community at all. Things like, see how they love one another, or there's nobody needy in this community. My favorite one, though, is an odd one, and it goes like this. And awe came upon everyone. It would seem that the measure of our health as a community may well reside in our ability to stand in awe at what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it. Some years ago, I was invited to give a talk to 600 social workers in Richmond, Virginia, and sometimes I don't read things that carefully. I thought it was like a keynote or something. But then I looked at it, and it was a gang in-service training from 9 to 5. I was the only speaker. So I went, yikes. So I invited two homies to go with me, Jose and Andre. And I said, I want you to come with me and get up and tell your stories. Take your time, because we got a long-ass day to fill. So Jose got up, and a man at about 25 years old, and gang member, been to prison, tattooed, worked his way up in Homeboy until he became a much valued member of our substance abuse team, a man solidly in his own recovery, now helping younger guys with addiction issues. A man also had a stretch of time as a homeless man and as a heroin addict. So he got up to speak, and he kind of began in a kind of a self-effacing way. You know, he said, I guess you could say my mom and me, we didn't get along so good. I think I was 6 when she looked at me and she said, why don't you just kill yourself? You're such a burden to me. Well, 600 social workers gasped. And then he said, it sounds way worser in Spanish, he said, you know. He said, I think I was 9 when my mom drove me down to the deepest part of Baja California, and she walks me up to an orphanage. And she knocked on the door. When the guy appeared, she said, I found this kid. And she left me there for 90 days until my grandmother could get out of her where she had dumped me, and my grandmother rescued me. My mom beat me every single day of my elementary school years with things you could imagine and a lot of things you couldn't. Every day, my back was bloodied and scarred. In fact, I had to wear 3 t-shirts to school every day. The first t-shirt, because you could see the blood, and second t-shirt, it would still seep through. Finally, the third t-shirt, you couldn't see any blood. Kids at school, they'd make fun of me. Hey, fool, it's 100 degrees. Why are you wearing 3 t-shirts? And then he stopped speaking, so overwhelmed with emotion, and he seemed to be staring at a piece of his story that only he could see. And when he could speak through his tears, he said, "I wore 3 t-shirts throughout my whole adult years because I was ashamed of my wounds. I didn't want anybody to see them. And now I welcome my wounds. I run my fingers over my scars. My wounds are my friends. After all, how can I help heal the wounded if I don't welcome my own wounds?" And awe came upon everyone. The measure of our compassion lies not in our service of those on the margins, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. Let me end with this. People are always asking about enemies working together, and it's difficult at first. A homie will come in and say, "I'm ready, ready, ready." And I'll say, I got an opening in the bakery, but you have to work with X, Y, and Z, and I rattle off the names of rivals. And they always say the same thing. They always say, "I'll work with them, I'm not going to talk to them." Which used to bother me in the old days until you discover that human beings cannot demonize somebody they know. It's impossible. So I had a homie who I thought was ready, a little chaparrito, 19 years old. Everybody called him Youngster. And Youngster, I bring him to the Homeboy silkscreen, our biggest business, been around for 20 years. Thousands of rival gang members have worked there. I introduce him to his 30 coworkers, and I watch him as he shakes hands with each one. Firm handshake, looks them in the eyes. Lots of enemies, lots of rivals. I think, wow, this is great. Until he gets to the last guy, a guy who seems to be wanting to avoid this encounter altogether. A kid everybody called Puppet. And when Puppet and Youngster are in each other's vicinity, they mumble something, they stare at their shoes, they don't shake hands. Well, I know they're enemies because I know what gangs they're from, but he just finished shaking hands with a whole bunch of enemies. I discover later that this is a hatred that's very deep and very personal and beyond which neither of them think they can get past. So I sense that much at the moment, and I say, "Look, if you guys can't hang working together, let me know. I got a bunch of people who want this job." And they don't say a word. About 6 months later, a Puppet leaves his home to go to a corner store some distance from his house. He buys something. On the way home, for some reason, he decides to take a shortcut. He dodges into an alley, and because he's taken this detour, suddenly, unexpectedly, he's surrounded by 10 members of a rival gang, 10 against 1, and they beat him badly. And he falls to the ground, and while he's lying on the ground, they will not stop kicking his head until he's lifeless. Somebody finds his body and takes him to White Memorial Hospital, where he's declared effectively brain dead. But it's the policy there to keep you connected to machines for 48 hours so you can get 2 straight days of a flat read with no brain activity, making it official so the doctors can sign the death certificates. This allowed family and friends to gather. I was at St. Louis giving a talk. I flew home immediately. I've seen a lot of terrible, horrible things in my life, nothing to compare to the sight of this young man with his head swollen many times its size. It was horrifying. You could barely train your eyes on him. And as a priest, at the end of the 48 hours, I gave a blessing prayer. I anointed his forehead with oil, and then we disconnected. And a week later, I buried him. But in the first 24 hours, as Puppet was lying beaten in the hospital, I was alone in my office. It was 8:30 at night. The phone rings, and it's Youngster, Puppet's co-worker from the silkscreen factory. "Hey," he says, that's messed up about what happened to Puppet. I said, yeah, it is. And then with a remarkable kind of eagerness, he said, is there anything I can do? Can I give him my blood? And we both fell silent under the weight of it. And then finally, he breaks the silence, choking back his tears. And he says with great deliberation, he was not my enemy. He was my friend. We worked together. Now, can I say that always happens at Homeboy Industries? Of course it does. Any exceptions? I can't think of a single one. And it shouldn't surprise us that God's own dream come true for us, that we be one, just happens to be our own deepest longing for ourselves. For it turns out it's mutual. And so you stand at the margins, hoping to dismantle the barriers that exclude, and the world will accuse you of wasting your time. But the prophet Jeremiah writes, in this place of which you say it is a waste, there will be heard again the voice of mirth and the voice of gladness, the voices of those who sing. And so we go from this place to make those voices heard. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and it will not disappoint. And if it delays, we can wait for it. Thank you very much.